What few people know about Mitchell's legendary stand is the extraordinary series of events that led to his solitary patrol that morning. A scheduling error had left a critical gap in the carrier group's defensive perimeter. When the Combat Information Center detected the approaching formation, Mitchell was the only pilot already airborne and in position to respond. "Command gave me a choice," Mitchell explained during a rare interview, "but it wasn't really a choice at all. Those ships carried over 5,000 sailors, my friends, my family. Retreat wasn't an option." The approaching aircraft belonged to a rogue military faction that had recently seized control of several island bases in the region. Intelligence reports later revealed they had planned a surprise attack on the carrier group, hoping to establish dominance in the disputed waters. As Mitchell approached the formation, he employed an unconventional tactic that would later be studied in military academies worldwide. Instead of directly engaging, he executed a series of provocative flybys, creating the illusion that his single aircraft was actually part of a larger force lying in wait. "Psychological warfare was my only advantage," Mitchell said. "I needed them to believe they were flying into a trap." The gambit worked. The formation split into smaller groups, allowing Mitchell to engage them individually using the surrounding cloud cover for concealment. His Super Hornet, customized with the latest electronic countermeasures, effectively jammed enemy communications, creating further confusion among the attackers. Captain Eleanor Rodriguez, commander of the U.S. Independence, monitored the entire encounter from the carrier's bridge. "What Mitchell accomplished defies conventional military doctrine," she stated. "Every time we thought he was cornered, he found an opening. It was like watching a chess master play 12 opponents simultaneously." Perhaps most remarkable was Mitchell's ability to anticipate his opponent's movements. Having studied foreign combat tactics extensively, he recognized specific formation patterns and used this knowledge to predict their maneuvers seconds before they executed them. "The Super Hornet is an exceptional machine," Mitchell later explained, "but the real advantage was information. I could read their playbook because I'd spent years studying it." As fuel concerns became critical, Mitchell made a decisive move. He climbed rapidly to 40,000 feet before cutting his engines, creating a brief stealth window as he glided silently through the remaining formation. This unorthodox maneuver allowed him to surprise two aircraft that had been stalking him, forcing them to break away. The carrier group's reinforcements launched just as Mitchell's fuel warning indicators activated. His final transmission before returning to the carrier became famous among naval aviators. "Independence. This is Maverick. Skies are clear. Coming home." Later analysis of Mitchell's flight recorder revealed that he had come within seconds of complete fuel exhaustion. Had the engagement lasted even moments longer, his remarkable story might have ended very differently. Back on the carrier deck, exhausted and soaked in perspiration, Mitchell was met with stunned silence from the ground crew, a silence that quickly erupted into thunderous applause as word of his incredible feats spread throughout the ship. The days following Mitchell's extraordinary aerial engagement brought unprecedented attention to both the pilot and the carrier group. Military officials scrambled to understand how a single fighter had managed to repel what should have been an overwhelming force. "We initially thought the flight recorder data was corrupted," explained Admiral Jonathan Hayes, who led the subsequent investigation. "The maneuvers appeared impossible based on standard flight parameters. We had to review the footage multiple times to confirm what actually happened." Mitchell's Super Hornet told its own story. Upon inspection, maintenance crews discovered over 30 minor impact points where enemy fire had grazed the aircraft. The plane's right stabilizer had sustained damage that should have compromised its aerodynamic capabilities, yet Mitchell had compensated so effectively that even he hadn't noticed the impairment during combat. "He flew a wounded bird like it was in perfect condition," said Chief Mechanic Sarah Thompson. "Most pilots would have lost control with that kind of damage. Somehow, he instinctively adjusted for it." The international response was swift. Diplomatic channels suddenly reopened as the rogue faction, now exposed and embarrassed, found their regional allies distancing themselves. What had been planned as a show of force became instead a humiliating defeat that undermined their territorial claims. Meanwhile, Mitchell faced a different kind of battle, one against sudden fame. Military intelligence officers debriefed him for 72 hours straight, extracting every detail of the encounter for tactical analysis. His combat techniques were immediately incorporated into simulator training for elite pilots. "I'm not comfortable with the attention," Mitchell confessed to his squadron commander. "I just applied my training." Anyone with the same preparation would have made similar choices. His humility only enhanced his growing legend. Junior pilots aboard the carrier began studying his past mission logs, looking for insights into his decision-making process. Veterans with decades of experience requested assignments to his training sessions, eager to learn from someone who had rewritten aerial combat doctrine in less than an hour. The psychological impact on the carrier group proved equally significant. Morale soared as sailors realized the extent to which one of their own had protected them. Security Officer Michael Chen noted a measurable increase in readiness metrics across all departments following the incident. "When someone steps up like that, it changes the culture," Chen observed. Everyone started asking themselves what more they could do, how they could exceed expectations in their own roles. Perhaps most remarkably, Mitchell's actions altered strategic planning throughout the fleet. Commanders began reassessing their assumptions about numerical disadvantage, incorporating more emphasis on individual initiative and tactical creativity, rather than relying solely on overwhelming force. 6 weeks after the encounter, Mitchell received a classified new assignment. The details remain restricted, but sources indicate he now leads an elite program developing next-generation combat tactics for asymmetric engagements. The Rogue faction never attempted another approach on any carrier group. Their surviving pilots, when later interviewed during peace negotiations, shared a unanimous sentiment. "We never want to face another pilot like that again. One was more than enough." Meanwhile, a small, unassuming addition appeared in the Naval Aviation Museum, a partially damaged stabilizer panel, quietly commemorating the day when a lone fighter took on an Armada and won. 3 years after Mitchell's historic engagement, its ripple effects continued to reshape military doctrine worldwide. What began as a single pilot's improvised defense had evolved into a comprehensive philosophy on asymmetric warfare, studied in military academies across the globe. The Mitchell Principle, as it became known in strategic circles, challenged conventional wisdom about force requirements. Colonel Dana Winters, lead instructor at the Air Combat Command Training Center, explained, "For decades, we operated on the assumption that numerical superiority was essential. Mitchell showed us that a single, well-trained operator with superior situational awareness can overcome seemingly impossible odds." This revolutionary thinking prompted a major shift in defense spending priorities. Rather than focusing exclusively on fleet expansion, military planners began allocating significant resources toward enhanced training programs and decision-making simulators. The emphasis moved from quantity to quality, specifically developing pilots who could think like Mitchell. "We can't mass-produce his natural instincts," noted Dr. Eleanor Jenkins, chief psychologist for the Naval Aviation Selection Program. "But we can identify candidates with similar cognitive patterns and nurture those abilities through specialized training." The technological innovations sparked by Mitchell's flight proved equally transformative. Engineers analyzing his combat data discovered that several of his maneuvers had pushed the Super Hornet beyond its documented capabilities. This led to a comprehensive revaluation of aircraft performance parameters and ultimately to the development of new flight control systems that could support such extreme handling. "He showed us possibilities we hadn't even considered," said lead engineer Marcus Chen of the Naval Air Systems Command. "By pushing existing technology to its absolute limit, he essentially blueprinted the next generation of combat aircraft." Meanwhile, Mitchell himself remained characteristically modest about his influence. Now heading a classified tactical development unit, he focused on transferring his knowledge to a select group of exceptional pilots. His training sessions became legendarily demanding, with washout rates approaching 60%. "He's not teaching us to fly like him," explained Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez, one of his few successful trainees. "He's teaching us to think like him, to see patterns, to anticipate, to make decisions under impossible pressure. The flying part is actually secondary." Perhaps most significantly, Mitchell's stand changed how potential adversaries calculated risk. Intelligence reports indicated that opposing forces had dramatically revised their operational requirements when targeting carrier groups, essentially tripling their committed resources as a direct response to the Mitchell scenario. "He created a deterrent that exists purely in the minds of our opponents," observed Rear Admiral James Harrison. "They now have to consider whether any engagement might involve facing another Mitchell. The psychological impact is immeasurable." On the anniversary of the engagement, a small ceremony was held aboard the U.S. Independence. Without fanfare, a simple plaque was installed on the flight deck where Mitchell had landed his battle-damaged aircraft. The inscription read only, "One stood against many. Courage redefined." As for the legend himself, Mitchell continued to deflect personal recognition, insisting that his focus remain on preparing the next generation. When pressed about his legacy during a rare interview, he offered a single, thoughtful response. What happened that day wasn't about one pilot beating the odds. It was proof that proper training, clear thinking, and absolute commitment can overcome any challenge. That's the real story worth telling. 5 years to the day after Mitchell's legendary stand, a new class of naval aviators graduated from the elite program he had established. Dubbed Mavericks in unofficial circles, these 23 pilots represented the culmination of his revolutionary training methodology. "What makes this program different isn't the technical instruction," explained Commander Sophia Chen, Mitchell's deputy and designated successor. "It's the fundamental approach to decision-making under pressure. We don't just train pilots to fly. We develop their ability to process complex situations in microseconds." The program's graduation exercise had become famous, or perhaps infamous, throughout military circles. Each candidate faced a simulated recreation of Mitchell's original encounter, though with key variables altered to prevent memorized responses. None had ever achieved Mitchell's results, but their performance benchmarks consistently exceeded traditional combat training by significant margins. "We're not trying to clone Mitchell," Commander Chen continued. "We're extracting the cognitive framework that made his achievement possible and adapting it to different personality types and flying styles." The broader implications for military preparedness extended far beyond aviation. Army Special Forces, naval surface warfare, and even cyber defense units had begun implementing variations of Mitchell's situational awareness training. The common thread was a shift from rigid operational procedures toward adaptive thinking and creative problem-solving. "Mitchell showed us that the human element remains our greatest asset," said General Marcus Thompson during the graduation ceremony. "In an age of increasing automation and artificial intelligence, his story reminds us that human intuition and courage still make the critical difference." Military technology had evolved in response as well. The new generation of combat aircraft incorporated Mitchell Mode, an adaptive flight control system that expanded performance parameters when standard operational limits might otherwise prevent a pilot from executing necessary maneuvers. Early tests showed a 30% increase in survival rates during extreme evasive scenarios. Research psychologists studying Mitchell and his top graduates identified several shared cognitive traits: exceptional pattern recognition, unusual comfort with ambiguity, and the ability to maintain calm physiological responses during extreme stress. These insights led to refined selection criteria for combat pilots across all service branches. "We've essentially rewritten the playbook on what makes an effective combat aviator," noted Dr. James Harrison, lead researcher for the Military Cognitive Performance Division. "The old metrics emphasized reaction time and technical proficiency. Mitchell showed us that contextual intelligence and creative decision-making are equally critical." As for Mitchell himself, he made a rare public appearance at the graduation, though he declined the opportunity to address the gathering formally. Instead, he spoke privately with each graduate, continuing his tradition of personalized guidance. One of those conversations was overheard by an attending journalist. "Remember, what happened that day wasn't extraordinary," Mitchell told a young pilot. "It was simply the necessary response to the situation at hand. You'll face your own impossible scenarios someday. When that happens, trust your training, trust your aircraft, and most importantly, trust yourself." The graduating class departed for assignments across the globe, each carrying Mitchell's philosophy to different theaters and operational contexts. Military analysts predicted that within a decade, this expanding network of Mitchell-trained aviators would fundamentally transform aerial combat doctrine worldwide. As the ceremony concluded, Mitchell avoided the crowd of dignitaries and slipped away to the flight line. There, against the setting sun, he spent a quiet moment inspecting the newest Super Hornet variant, his hand running appreciatively along its fuselage, his expression suggesting a man who saw not just an aircraft, but a partner in possibilities yet to come. A decade after Mitchell's historic engagement, a classified intelligence file was finally declassified, revealing the full context of what had truly occurred that day. The document, known simply as Encounter Analysis R77, painted an even more extraordinary picture than the legend that had grown around the event. The opposing force that day wasn't simply a rogue military faction, explained former intelligence officer Dr. Eleanor Williams, who had led the original analysis team. They were an elite squadron specifically assembled to test carrier group vulnerabilities. Their pilots ranked among the top combat aviators in their respective services. This revelation stunned the military aviation community. Mitchell hadn't merely defeated numerically superior forces. He had outmaneuvered and outthought pilots, specifically selected for their exceptional abilities, many with combat records rivaling his own. The declassified files also revealed that the engagement had been recorded by multiple satellite systems, providing unprecedented analytical data. These recordings showed something remarkable. Mitchell had adapted his tactics 16 separate times during the battle, each adjustment precisely calibrated to counter the evolving strategies of his opponents. What we witnessed was essentially real-time tactical evolution, noted Dr. Williams. He wasn't just reacting. He was predicting his opponent's adaptations and preparing counters before they implemented changes. It was like watching a chess grandmaster thinking 8 moves ahead, but at supersonic speeds. Perhaps most significantly, the files confirmed that Mitchell had intentionally avoided lethal shots on 7 occasions, instead forcing aircraft to withdraw through tactical disadvantage. This revelation added a moral dimension to his already legendary performance. He understood that de-escalation was the true victory, explained Admiral James Peterson, who had overseen the carrier group. Anyone can destroy an enemy. Mitchell showed something far more valuable, how superior skill can achieve objectives while minimizing loss of life. The military educational impact was immediate. Training programs that had been built around Mitchell's known tactics were now enhanced with this deeper understanding of his strategic thinking. Simulation programs incorporated his predictive adaptation techniques, challenging pilots to develop similar foresight. We've moved beyond teaching the what of Mitchell's engagement to understanding the why behind each decision, said Commander Robert Chen, current director of the advanced tactical program Mitchell had established. This transforms his experience from a remarkable historical event into a repeatable methodology. For the public, this new information transformed an already inspiring story into something approaching mythology. Media coverage emphasized the revelation that Mitchell had faced not just any pilots, but a specially assembled team of elite aviators, and still prevailed. The revelation prompted a quiet ceremony at the Naval War College, where Mitchell's tactical analysis was permanently installed in the core curriculum. During the installation, Fleet Admiral Harrison offered a perspective that resonated throughout the defense community. History gives us very few perfect case studies, moments where exceptional human performance meets extraordinary circumstances in ways that fundamentally advance our understanding. Mitchell's stand now stands alongside the most significant warrior achievements in military history. Meanwhile, The man himself had retreated further from public attention, accepting a position developing next-generation combat training systems. His focus remained unwavering, translating his intuitive understanding of aerial combat into frameworks that could be taught to others. When contacted for comment on the declassified information, Mitchell offered only a brief statement. Knowledge of their capabilities wouldn't have changed my approach that day. When facing superior numbers, the fundamentals remain constant. Seize the initiative, control the engagement rhythm, and never do what they expect. Everything else is just details. 15 years after the historic engagement, a remarkable gathering took place at a secluded naval air station. For the first time, James Mitchell came face to face with the pilots he had outmaneuvered that fateful day. The meeting, arranged through diplomatic channels following years of improved relations, was closed to the public and press. Only a handful of senior military officials attended as observers to this unprecedented reconciliation. It was surreal, recounted Admiral Catherine Chin, who supervised the meeting. These men had been adversaries in one of the most analyzed aerial engagements in history, and now they were sitting across from each other as professionals, comparing notes. The encounter began with formal introductions and palpable tension. Colonel Sergei Volkov, who had led the opposing formation, was the first to break the ice. I spent 7 years trying to understand how you anticipated our pincer maneuver, he said directly to Mitchell. No one should have been able to predict that sequence. Mitchell's response reflected his characteristic humility, mixed with professional precision. It wasn't prediction as much as pattern recognition, he explained. Your third vector change followed standard tactical doctrine. I gambled that you would continue the sequence rather than improvise. What followed was an extraordinary 6-hour discussion that evolved into a collaborative analysis of the engagement. Using advanced simulation technology, the pilots recreated key moments from the battle, freeze-framing critical decision points and discussing alternative approaches. The most remarkable aspect wasn't what was said, but what wasn't, noted Commander James Harrison, who documented the meeting. There was no animosity, no defensiveness, just mutual professional respect and genuine curiosity about each other's decision-making processes. Perhaps the most poignant moment came when Lieutenant Pavel Mendez, whose aircraft had been forced to withdraw with critical damage, asked Mitchell why he had chosen not to take a clear shot that would have destroyed his plane. Winning didn't require your destruction, Mitchell answered simply. It required your withdrawal. Different objective, different tactics. This philosophy, that combat excellence sometimes means finding ways to succeed without maximizing casualties, became the central theme of a joint tactical paper later authored by Mitchell and Volkov. Their collaboration eventually led to the establishment of an international exchange program for combat aviators, focusing on crisis de-escalation techniques. The meeting concluded with an unexpected proposal from Volkov. Our country should establish a permanent mixed-force training program, he suggested. The next generation deserves to learn from both perspectives of this engagement. Mitchell's endorsement was immediate and enthusiastic. Within a year, the International Tactical Response Initiative was formed, bringing together elite pilots from former adversary nations to develop shared protocols for managing international airspace incidents. For military historians, this reconciliation added a profound final chapter to an already legendary story. Mitchell's greatest victory wasn't in the air that day, wrote Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez in her definitive analysis. It was 15 years later, when he transformed an act of combat into a foundation for cooperation. The program continues today, having trained over 300 pilots from 27 nations. Its insignia features a simple design: a single stylized aircraft surrounded by multiple others, with the Latin phrase hostis hodi, amicus cras, today's opponent, tomorrow's friend. As for Mitchell and Volkov, they maintain regular correspondence, occasionally meeting to update their joint training curriculum. Their most recent edition focuses on what they now call the ultimate victory, the moment when former adversaries set aside past conflicts to build something better together. 20 years after Mitchell's legendary stand, his influence had transcended military spheres and permeated broader aspects of leadership philosophy worldwide. What began as an extraordinary aerial engagement had evolved into a paradigm for high-stakes decision-making across diverse fields. The Mitchell methodology, as it became known in executive circles, had been adapted for crisis management in healthcare, emergency response, and corporate leadership. Harvard Business School introduced a case study based on his tactical choices, examining how his principles could apply to organizational challenges requiring rapid adaptation under pressure. Mitchell demonstrated something universal, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, Dean of Strategic Leadership at the Naval Postgraduate School. When conventional wisdom suggests retreat as the only logical option, there often exists an unconventional path forward, if you have the courage and clarity to see it. This broader application of Mitchell's approach led to an unexpected invitation, addressing the International Crisis Response Summit in Geneva. Though initially reluctant, Mitchell eventually agreed, making a rare public appearance before an audience that included not just military leaders but humanitarian directors, corporate executives, and emergency management experts. His address, delivered without notes, focused not on the technical aspects of his famous engagement, but on the mental frameworks that had guided his decisions that day. When facing overwhelming opposition, conventional measurements of success become irrelevant, he told the rapt audience. The question isn't whether you can win by traditional metrics, but whether you can redefine the parameters of engagement to create new possibilities. The speech resonated far beyond the conference hall. Educational institutions began incorporating his principles into curriculum, spanning from medical training to business leadership. The core insight, that creative thinking under extreme pressure could transform seemingly impossible situations, proved universally applicable. Meanwhile, the military applications continued to evolve. The joint training program Mitchell established with former adversaries had expanded to include virtual reality components that could simulate his famous engagement with unprecedented fidelity. Participants could experience key moments from multiple perspectives, including Mitchell's. "It's humbling," said Lieutenant Commander Emma Rodriguez after completing the simulation. "You think you understand what he accomplished from studying the records, but when you're actually in that cockpit, facing those decisions with those constraints, it's another level entirely." Perhaps most significantly, Mitchell's legacy influenced diplomatic approaches to regional conflicts. His demonstration that superior skill could achieve objectives while minimizing casualties became a guiding principle for military strategists working alongside diplomatic corps. The Mitchell Doctrine essentially reframed how we approach asymmetric confrontations, noted Ambassador James Harrison. The goal shifted from overwhelming force to strategic precision, achieving objectives while creating pathways to future reconciliation. On the 20th anniversary of the engagement, Mitchell finally accepted the Distinguished Service Cross he had previously declined. During the ceremony, he used his acceptance speech to redirect attention to the next generation of leaders facing new and different challenges. What happened 20 years ago was one pilot's response to one specific situation, he reminded the audience. The real legacy isn't about memorizing those tactics, but developing the mindset that can find unique solutions to unique problems. Yesterday's answers rarely solve tomorrow's challenges. As he concluded his remarks, Mitchell offered a perspective that encapsulated his evolution from combat pilot to philosophical leader. The greatest victories aren't won through superior firepower or even superior skill. They're achieved when we expand our definition of victory itself, finding solutions that not only resolve immediate conflicts but build foundations for lasting cooperation. 25 years after the historic engagement, James Mitchell faced perhaps his greatest challenge yet. Diagnosed with a rare neurological condition affecting fine motor control, the very skill that had made his legendary flight possible, he confronted a future that would require him to redefine his contributions to the field he had transformed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mitchell later wrote in his memoir, Perspectives from the Cockpit. The same hands that had performed impossible maneuvers now struggled with buttoning a shirt. Life has its own way of keeping us humble. Rather than retreat from public service, Mitchell embarked on what many consider his most significant contribution, translating the neural patterns of exceptional pilots into learning frameworks for artificial assistance systems. Working alongside Dr. Elena Rodriguez at the Advanced Cognitive Research Institute, he volunteered for thousands of hours of neural mapping, while recounting and reliving his famous engagement. What Mitchell offered was unprecedented. Dr. Rodriguez explained, "We weren't just recording his memories of the event. We were capturing the actual decision pathways his brain formed during extreme performance states. This gave us insights into human potential that laboratory conditions could never replicate." The research led to breakthrough developments in pilot assistance technology. The Enhanced Situational Processing (ESP) system, designed to augment rather than replace human decision-making, incorporated Mitchell's cognitive patterns into its underlying architecture. Early tests showed remarkable improvements in pilot performance during complex scenarios. "We're not creating autopilots," Mitchell insisted during a technology review. "We're developing systems that enhance natural human intuition during moments when processing time is critical. The pilot remains the decision-maker. The system just helps organize information the way an exceptional mind would." This philosophy, that technology should enhance rather than replace human judgment, became Mitchell's new mission. He delivered lectures at technology conferences, arguing passionately that artificial systems should be designed to amplify human strengths rather than render them obsolete. His perspective gained particular traction among a new generation of aerospace engineers developing the next generation of combat aircraft. These planes incorporated Mitchell-inspired architecture that prioritized unprecedented levels of human-machine integration, creating systems that could learn from and adapt to their pilots' unique cognitive styles. Mitchell's legacy evolved from what one exceptional pilot could do alone to what ordinary pilots might achieve with properly designed support, noted Commander Samuel Chen during the unveiling of the new system. "It's a natural progression that honors the original achievement while acknowledging technological reality." For Mitchell personally, this transition from pilot to architect of future aviation systems brought unexpected fulfillment. At a retirement ceremony marking his formal departure from active service, he reflected on this evolution with characteristic perspective. "That day, 25 years ago, I was just one pilot making the best decisions I could with the information available," he told the gathered audience. "Today, we're creating systems that make that level of performance accessible to any properly trained aviator. That's the true victory, not what one person accomplished, but how that accomplishment elevated what's possible for everyone." The neurological condition eventually confined Mitchell to a wheelchair, but his mind remained as sharp and innovative as ever. From his home overlooking the Pacific, he continued consulting on advanced flight systems, mentoring young pilots, and occasionally, when he thought no one was watching, gazing skyward with the unmistakable expression of someone who had once danced among the clouds and changed the very nature of that dance for generations to come.